Hey everyone, welcome to Wealth Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Reynolds, independent financial advisor and owner of Elevation Financial. Thanks for joining me today. You can find me on the web, as always, at elevationfinancial.com. And this podcast comes out weekly, mostly weekly, a few exceptions, but weekly in general. And just a reminder, I like to just kind of recap this every now and then. I do this in multiple sources. I broadcast live every Tuesday afternoon at 1:30 p.m. Eastern via Facebook and YouTube Live. You can find the links to subscribe on my website. And of course, also pushed out via podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts as the audio version. So just a reminder of where you can find this show everywhere. So again, thanks for joining me today. Today, we're going to talk about what documents do I need to keep on file. Last week, I did a checklist, a supplemental checklist to go with the episode, and I'm doing the same thing this week. I have a checklist for you this week as well. So just a reminder, this is episode 109. So if you look up on my website, episode 109, you will find this episode's landing page, and you will then be able to download the supplemental checklist. So that hopefully will be helpful for those who want to grab a checklist to take with you. So again, what documents do I need to keep on file is the topic for today. So we're going to run through a list of documents that we may encounter in our financial lives and talk about what to keep on file, what's important, how long. And before we start, let's talk about how to keep things on file. Obviously, you know, the tried and true could be paper, but I am not a fan of paper. I'm more of a fan of digital storage. So I use things like Google Drive, Evernote. So you might consider creating a storage system that allows you to store these documents digitally, like on Google Drive or Evernote or whatever file system you would like to use. So I also use an app called Scannable on my phone. Scannable is iPhone only, so that might be, you may need to look for something else if you're an Android user, but Scannable works great on iPhone. There are lots of scanning apps available, and you'll be able to use your phone to scan documents and turn them into a digital format that you can then save in your file system. So again, I like Google Drive. It's a great place to store things. So let's walk through what documents to keep on file. So one, let's talk about taxes. If you're filing tax returns, you want to keep at least 3 years of state and federal tax returns and the supporting documentation to go with this on file. So the supporting documentation can be things like, W-2s, 1099, end of your statements from banks, investment accounts, charitable contributions, anything that you would give to your accountant at tax time to kind of support income and expenses that would be used for your tax preparation. So the supporting documentation is also important. So, I would maybe set aside a folder, and in that folder, put the tax return, obviously, and then the supporting documentation that you gave to your accountant or that you use in filing your taxes in a folder along with it. So that would be a good practice in storing your tax information. Also, look up your state. Depending on your state, states like California, for example, sometimes require that you keep tax returns for longer than 3 years. So if that's the case in your state, obviously follow that state's guidelines. So be sure you look up the guidelines in your state, but generally at least 3 years is what you're looking for. If you think you made maybe some errors and forgot to report some income and it's more than 25% of your gross income, you want to keep your tax returns for 6 years on file. So if you think there's any errors that happen along the way, err on the side of a longer time period. If you're claiming a loss through securities or bad debt, keep those records for 7 years. If you made any taxable gifts or received an inheritance, keep all your forms that go with those events and supporting documentation permanently. Keep those on file indefinitely. All right, next, let's talk about healthcare documents. Will you apply for Medicaid, perhaps related to long-term care expenses? If so, keep your financial statements and records of all these transactions for the previous 5 years to support your application for Medicaid because there's a look-back period of 5 years. So make sure you keep that documentation for 5 years. Do you have an HSA, which is a health savings account? If so, keep all your medical receipts from the date that HSA was opened. Do you write off medical expenses on your tax return? If so, keep your records as long as you keep your tax returns, which is generally going to be 3 years. Are you on Medicare? If so, consider keeping your Medicare summary notices for at least a year or until the bill is paid in full. So that would be a good practice to make sure you keep those at least for a year. If you're enrolled in an employer drug plan that is considered creditable, keep your annual notice of creditable coverage that's provided by your employer. It's going to be needed if you enroll in Part D at a later time. All right, let's talk about legal documents next. If you're a U.S. citizen, keep your Social Security card, birth certificate, and passport. Obviously, you want to keep the originals, but I am a big fan of keeping the digital versions on file securely as well, so they're readily available. If you're a foreign national, keep all your documents related to your entrance into the U.S., such as your passport, green card, I-94, etc. Do you have an estate plan? If so, and by the way, an estate plan doesn't mean it has to be some really complex thing. It can be as simple as a will and some basic estate documents. So if you have an estate plan, keep a copy of your will, any trusts, powers of attorney, general and healthcare, living wills, beneficiary designations, all that stuff. Keep that stuff indefinitely on file in a safe place. Also, you would consider giving copies to people that play an important role in your estate plan, like your executors, trustees, family members. It doesn't hurt to keep a copy of those with other people you trust as well. So definitely keep those on file. Are you currently married? If so, keep your marriage certificate on file. It might be needed in case of a name change, proof of marriage for insurance benefits, or obtaining a joint mortgage. If you have a prenup, store that in an original copy in a safe place as well. If you've been divorced, keep your divorce papers on file. That's probably a pretty obvious one. Have you served in the military? If so, keep your military discharge papers because they may be needed to prove your eligibility for veterans benefits. So keep those on file indefinitely. Do you have a safety deposit box? If so, keep the information to access it documented for someone who might need it in the event of your passing. All right, let's talk about next, asset and debt related documents. Do you have any investment accounts or bank statements? If so, keep those, the most current statements on file, either paper or electronic. These can really be supplied pretty easily by your custodian or your financial advisor. Keep your end of year statements on file until you complete your tax return. These would go with the supporting documentation in your tax returns. If you own investments purchased before the year 2012, then keep records of what you paid for the investments in the event you sell them in the future, because the 1099 may not report the cost basis. After 2012, custodians have been required to track cost basis, but if you bought any investments before 2012, your custodian may not be tracking that cost basis for you. Do you have any retirement accounts? If so, keep the documentation for any contributions and withdrawals. If you took a coronavirus-related distribution, keep your withdrawal request and your 1099-R on file as well. If you made a Roth conversion, this is important. This happens a lot. This is more common than some other stuff. So a Roth conversion is when you take a traditional IRA and you convert it to a Roth IRA. And there are many reasons why you might do that. And if you made a Roth conversion, keep the records showing the conversion. And if you made a non-deductible traditional IRA contribution, keep the form 8606 until the account is fully withdrawn to track that cost basis. So one example of this is a backdoor Roth IRA. So a lot of times my clients will have a certain income level which prohibits them from directly contributing to a Roth IRA. So we do what's called a backdoor Roth IRA. When you do that, you contribute a non-deductible contribution to a traditional IRA, document it with Form 8606, and then convert it to a Roth. The Form 8606 tells the IRS exactly what you've done. You didn't take a deduction, and you want to keep that on file indefinitely. And so that Form 8606 can be supplied by your financial advisor or custodian, whoever's helping you with that. Keep that on file. Next, let's talk about if you're a small business owner. You want to keep all of your business documents and entity and formation documents readily available. So your federal EIN, which we talked about a couple episodes ago, your business formation documents, ownership agreements, any business licenses, you want to keep all that on file and readily available. I keep all that stuff in a Google Drive folder for my business. It's in digital format, it's secure, it's easy to access if I need to. Really important to have that stuff on file. Also, any payroll records, employment tax records, receipts for all expenses. Payroll is pretty easy if you're using a payroll system. I use Gusto, for example. A lot of people use different payroll systems. They'll be able to supply all that documentation for you. Also, expenses. So receipt tracking is something that a lot of business owners tend to overlook sometimes. Personally, whenever I have a business expenditure, I keep the receipt. If it's digital already, I just save it to a folder on my desktop. If it's not digital, I'll scan it and then I'll again save that to a folder on my desktop. And then once a year, I drag all those receipts into a folder in Google Drive labeled, 2021 receipts, for example. And that way, if I ever need them for documentation or proof, I can just go grab them from that folder and search. So that's important to keep that information. You also want to keep records of employee benefits like retirement plan documents, whether they're active or not. Keep those retirement plan documents like 401k information. Next, let's talk about debts, student loans, mortgages, things like that. If you have any debts, keep the loan documents until the loan is paid off. Seems pretty obvious, but just a reminder, you want to keep all documentation until loans are paid off. I would keep them even after. So once the loan's paid off, keep the documentation on file, proving the loan's been paid off in full. Keep that letter of confirmation. Keep that indefinitely. Let's talk about property. If you own property like cars, real estate, keep the deeds, titles, settlement statements, bills of sale, all that stuff on file until you sell the property. Also keep documentation showing the purchase-related fees that were capitalized on file until you decide to sell the property. Do you have a home office that you receive a tax deduction for? Maybe you're self-employed. If so, keep all the receipts for any housing or home office related expenses like utility bills, mortgage statements, anything that is documented to go with your tax return when you claim those deductions. Home improvements. Let's talk about that. Have you made any improvements to your home? If so, keep those receipts related to home improvements because they might be used to substantiate any adjustments on the cost basis of your property. Do you own property in multiple states? If so, keep detailed records proving which state you lived in for the majority of the year, especially important if you're concerned about your estate income tax liability or establishing residency. All right, other documents. Do you have any higher education information like college, any certifications, any kind of programs that you completed, continuing education included? Keep all those certifications, transcripts, all that stuff, proving you completed the coursework. That may occasionally come up, and you want to be sure you can have that stuff on file. Insurance policies. Keep the most current policies on file and readily available. Life insurance, super important. Disability insurance, auto, home insurance. Keep all of your declarations, pages, and documents on file, readily available. If you're currently employed, keep any contracts, non-solicits, non-competes, any kind of contracts you've signed as it relates to your employment. You want to have that stuff readily available, especially last week we talked about career changing. So keep that stuff on file in the event of changing jobs or changing careers. You may need to go back and reference that stuff later or currently in your employment. So that is a pretty big list. So I don't want to overwhelm you. So what I want to do is make sure I remind you that we do have a checklist. So obviously this is more of an explanatory, or is that a real word, explanatory? More of an explanation of the why behind things and time frames and what documents to keep, and more of a primer on what's important to keep. But assuming you really want to dig into this and make some changes and set up a system to file this stuff, go grab the checklist. Go to elevationfinancial.com, look for episode 109. Again, if you go to my website and click on resources and the Wealth Redefined podcast, look for episode 109. And if you look at the landing page for this episode, you will see this checklist you can download. And it's a PDF. You can open it up. You can reference it. You can work on it little by little and kind of organize your documents. And that'll be a great checklist you can use to kind of organize the documents you want to keep on file and readily available. Now, again, let's talk about the how behind it. So for me, I'm a big fan of Google Drive, as I mentioned before. There are various ways you can store documents. You could store it just locally on your computer. I'm not a big fan of that unless you have really good backups, because if something happens to your hard drive, your stuff is all gone. So for me, I like Google Drive because it's in the cloud. I replicate it on my desktop as well. There are backup systems for Drive, and if something happens to my computer, it's not lost, it's in the cloud. But there are other systems like Dropbox, Box.com, Microsoft, has a file system, a lot of things you can use for storing documents digitally. Evernote is one as well. So security is really important when you're storing items digitally. So you want to make sure that whatever system you're using is encrypted, and meets your security requirements to your satisfaction. Look at their security practices, make sure they're solid. All the big providers are going to have solid security practices for the most part. And you want to make sure that two-step verification is turned on for any service that you use for storing sensitive documents. That means that in order to log in, it has to text your phone or give you a push via an app to make sure that you're really in possession of the device that is tied to the login. So that way, if someone gets your password somewhere else, they would have to have your phone to log in. So be sure you have really tight security practices enabled for any system you're using to store sensitive documents like this. So again, go grab the checklist, episode 109. But that is a kind of a walkthrough of what documents are important to keep on file. I have a little side note, kind of a salesy plug for myself a little bit here. I hope you don't mind indulging me, but as a financial advisor, I set up a vault to store this stuff for you a lot of times, especially the things I work on. So for example, financial planning documents, estate documents, insurance documents. I set up a system where you can upload those things and I can kind of store it for you in my secure file system as a secondary system, or in some cases, a primary system. So you might talk to your financial advisor and see, hey, do they have a portal you can use to kind of help you keep track of this stuff? It's not a bad thing to have it in both places, with someone else that's a professional and with your own file system as well. So whatever your comfort level is. All right. So with that, as always, you know where to find me. You can reach me at elevationfinancial.com if you have questions about this or anything else. I also make a meeting link available as always. So if you want to book a meeting with me, it's complimentary. We'll chat about whatever questions or comments you have. But again, don't forget the checklist for this episode 109 if you want to grab that. All right. Thanks everyone for joining me today. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.